The West was a land where divisions ran deep, where bloodlines and pride often dictated a man's worth more than the sweat of his labor. A poor farmer, his hands hardened by endless toil, knew this truth better than most. Though he rose with the dawn and worked until the stars lit the sky, his poverty marked him as less than others. He was tolerated, perhaps pitied, but never honored. Yet destiny has a way of revealing strength where others see only weakness, and it was in his lowest moment that something extraordinary happened. She was a native princess, daughter of a chief, raised with the weight of tradition and the sharp edge of expectation. Her life was not her own. It belonged to her people, her choices measured by the gaze of her tribe. And yet, when she saw the farmer, worn and mocked, standing with dignity even in rejection, something stirred in her heart. He had no riches, no fine words, no powerful allies, but he carried a truth the West itself respected, the quiet resilience of a man who endures. That night, as whispers spread around the fire and eyes watched with disbelief, she crossed the line no one dared to cross. With a courage born of conviction, she stepped forward, looked into his weary eyes, and pressed her lips softly against his. It was not a kiss of passion, it was a declaration. In that single gesture, she shattered the chains of prejudice that bound both their worlds, proving that love could reach where pride and tradition had long built walls. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Warriors who once mocked the farmer stood frozen, unable to speak, while elders exchanged troubled glances. The farmer himself, stunned by her boldness, felt his chest tighten with a mixture of fear and awe. For the first time, someone of power had not only seen him, but chosen to honor him in front of all. In that kiss, the weight of his years of invisibility broke, replaced by the spark of something he had never dared to hope for. By dawn, the story had already begun to spread. Some called it rebellion, others called it madness, but to many, it was something far greater, proof that love, when fearless, could break the hardest barriers and silence the sharpest tongues. In the unforgiving land of the Old West, where prejudice often ruled with an iron hand, the kiss of a native princess upon the lips of a poor farmer was a reminder that courage of the heart can be more powerful than the might of 100 warriors. The dawn after the kiss arrived heavy with tension. The fire from the night before had long died out, yet the whispers still burned through the camp like embers refusing to fade. Men and women alike replayed the moment in their minds. The princess, daughter of a chief, lowering the walls of tradition with one daring act. The poor farmer, who had walked among them like a shadow, now stood in the center of every gaze. He had not spoken a word, yet his silence thundered louder than speeches. For in the West, a single act of courage often outweighed a lifetime of silence. The farmer himself was torn between fear and wonder. He had endured countless days of mockery, bent under the weight of invisible chains that came not from his work, but from the judgments of others. And then, in one moment, she had touched his life in a way he never imagined. The kiss had not given him riches or erased his scars, but it had given him something far more dangerous: hope. And in the West, hope could change a man more deeply than gold or steel. The princess, however, bore the greater burden. Her people looked to her not as a woman, but as a symbol, an heir to traditions carved over generations. By kissing the farmer, she had broken those expectations, risking not only her own standing, but the fragile peace between pride and survival. Yet in her heart, she knew what others feared to admit: that prejudice, left unchallenged, would rot the soul of her people faster than any enemy's arrow. Her defiance was not against them, but for them. When the sun rose high, the elders gathered in silence. Their voices were low, their expressions hard. The decision lay heavy before them: to condemn her choice, or to allow this dangerous spark of unity to burn brighter. The farmer stood apart, head bowed, waiting for judgment that could shape his life or end it. Around him, the warriors who once mocked him now studied him with uncertainty. He had not fought, had not spoken, had not claimed anything for himself, and yet, through her act, he now carried the weight of the tribe's future. And so, the camp waited, holding its breath. A kiss had shaken centuries of pride, and everyone knew that the next step would either bury it in silence or let it grow into something unstoppable. In the Old West, where guns and arrows ruled, it was not a weapon that had begun this storm, but a gesture of the heart, and that made it far more dangerous. The elders did not speak quickly. They were men who had seen blood spill for less, who knew that a single decision could ignite flames impossible to control. Around the circle, the princess stood with her head unbowed, her eyes steady despite the storm gathering against her. The farmer stood farther back, his hands clenched, his heart racing. He had no voice in their council, no right to stand among them. Yet he was now the center of it all, the stone thrown into still water, rippling outward beyond control. One of the oldest men finally spoke. His words were sharp as the wind cutting through winter plains. He reminded them of the cost of pride, of battles fought because men clung to boundaries tighter than life itself. He warned that to punish the princess might preserve their traditions, but it would also chain their future to bitterness. His voice carried the weight of experience, and for a moment, silence followed. The tribe shifted uneasily, torn between fear of change and the pull of something greater. The farmer's mind was a storm. He had not asked for this, had never sought to be more than what he was, a simple man tied to the soil. Yet the kiss had marked him, and now his life could not return to obscurity. He felt the stares of the people, not a mockery now, but of expectation. Could he be more than a poor man, more than the sum of his toil? The question weighed on him heavier than the rejection he had once endured. The princess finally stepped forward. Her voice, calm yet unwavering, rose above the murmurs. She did not beg, nor did she defy in anger. Instead, she spoke of love, not as something weak, but as the only force capable of breaking the cycle of prejudice that bound them all. She reminded them that courage was not found only in battle, but in the willingness to see worth where others saw nothing. Her words cut through the air like an arrow, landing in every heart whether they admitted it or not. By dusk, no decision had been made. The camp divided itself into whispers and glances, some calling for tradition, others stirred by the truth in her words. And the farmer, once unseen, became the image of their struggle, a reminder that love, once declared, could not be ignored. The Old West had taught them that every man's worth was tested by fire. That night, they began to realize that perhaps the same was true of love. Night fell heavy on the camp, yet no one slept. The fire burned low, throwing long shadows across the faces of men and women who could not escape the weight of what had happened. Some whispered that the princess had shamed her people. Others whispered that she had revealed a courage no warrior could match. The farmer sat alone by the edge of the firelight, staring at the earth as though it might give him answers. He had known hunger, mockery, and silence his whole life, but never had he felt the crushing gaze of an entire tribe waiting for him to stumble. The princess, though outwardly calm, carried her own storm. She had grown up knowing that her every step was watched, her every word measured. Yet never before had her heart betrayed the boundaries placed around it. She did not regret the kiss, for it had come from truth, but she feared what it had unleashed. Still, she reminded herself of the West's cruel law. Change never came softly. It came like a storm, breaking what was weak so that only the strong could remain. The farmer, deep in thought, remembered the rejection he had endured in the past. He remembered being turned away from tables, mocked for his patched clothes and rough hands. That kiss had struck him not with passion alone, but with something deeper, a recognition that perhaps he was worth more than what others had always told him. For the first time, he wondered if his life carried meaning beyond the fences he built and the soil he tilled. As the night stretched, a group of young warriors approached him. Their faces were unreadable, their steps deliberate. He braced himself for mockery, for blows, for humiliation. Instead, they sat in silence beside him, staring into the fire. One of them finally spoke. "We saw how you stood when they scorned you. A man who endures without striking back is not weak. He is strong." The farmer's throat tightened, unable to answer, but the words sank into his heart like seeds falling on fertile soil. By the time the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the camp was divided, but something undeniable had begun to grow. The kiss had not only bound the princess and the farmer together, it had begun to bind others to the possibility of change. In the unforgiving land of the West, where pride and tradition often ruled harsher than steel, the idea that love could stand against prejudice was both dangerous and irresistible. The following day, the elders called another council, this time with the entire tribe gathered. The air was sharp with tension, every breath heavy with anticipation. The farmer stood at the edge once more, his shoulders stiff, while the princess stepped forward with quiet defiance. It was clear to all that neither would back down. Their silence alone spoke louder than any plea. Theirs was not a fleeting whim, but a truth they were willing to bear together. The first elder rose, his voice stern. He spoke of laws older than memory, of boundaries drawn in blood, of traditions meant to protect them from chaos. He declared that to ignore these laws was to risk the very fabric of their people. His words carried weight, and many nodded in agreement. But then another elder, her voice soft but piercing, rose in answer. She reminded them of wars fought over pride, of sons buried because hatred had been valued more than peace. She asked a question none dared to answer. Was a kiss really more dangerous than a war? The farmer listened in silence, his chest tight. He had never been asked for his voice, and even now, he did not trust it. Yet he felt the stares of children, curious and hopeful, and of mothers clutching them closer, as if sensing something greater than themselves unfolding. His silence was not weakness. It was the silence of a man carrying the weight of others' judgment without breaking. And though he did not speak, his endurance began to speak for him. The princess, however, refused to let the moment pass without truth. She stepped forward, her voice rising with clarity. "You say tradition protects us," she said. "But what protects us when tradition blinds us? If love can break chains, why fear it? If a man who is nothing can stand with dignity greater than gold, why deny him?" Her words were fire, and though many resisted, none could deny the flame that burned in them. By the time the sun dipped low, no resolution had been declared. Yet something had shifted in the hearts of those gathered. They had come expecting to condemn, to preserve pride. Instead, they left with questions that pierced deeper than any weapon. For the first time, they began to see the farmer not as a poor man, but as a mirror of their own struggle. A reminder that perhaps, just perhaps, love had the power to defeat even the fiercest prejudice. The days that followed were uneasy, filled with a tension that clung to the air like dust after a stampede. Some of the tribe still sneered at the farmer when he passed, whispering that he was unworthy of their princess. Others, though, began to watch him differently. They saw how he rose with the sun, how he worked the soil with steady hands, how he endured every insult without anger. Slowly, whispers of ridicule turned into murmurs of curiosity. Could it be that worth was not found in birth, but in the weight of a man's character? The farmer felt the eyes on him wherever he went. Once, such stares had crushed him, filling his chest with shame. But now, something in him had shifted. The kiss had lit a spark, and though he still carried doubt, he no longer bent beneath the judgment of others. He walked with quiet resolve, not trying to prove himself, but simply living as he always had, with honesty, with endurance, with dignity. In the Old West, where a man's strength was often measured by his silence, this carried more weight than words. The princess, too, felt the shift. She noticed how the young watched the farmer, imitating his steadiness, asking questions they had once been too proud to ask. Even the warriors who once mocked him began to fall silent in his presence, unsure of what they were beginning to see. Her choice had been bold, perhaps reckless, but as each day passed, she realized it had awakened something in her people they had long forgotten, the ability to see beyond pride. But change never came without resistance. One evening, a group of warriors confronted the farmer, their voices sharp with resentment. "You shame us," one spat, standing beside her as if you were her equal. The farmer did not argue, did not raise his fists. He simply looked at them with calm eyes, his silence carrying a strength they could not understand. When he turned and walked away, unbroken, the warriors found no victory in their words. They were left staring at each other, unsettled by the power of a man who refused to be diminished. By nightfall, Even those who despised him could not deny what they had seen. The farmer was no warrior, no leader, no man of wealth. Yet he carried himself with a dignity that none could strip from him. And in the West, where survival demanded more than pride, such dignity was worth more than gold. The elders watched all of this with careful eyes. They had hoped the storm would pass, that the kiss would be forgotten, but instead, it grew. Each day the people spoke less of tradition and more of the farmer, as though he were becoming a living test of what truly mattered. The elders debated in long councils, torn between protecting the old ways and acknowledging the undeniable truth. Something had shifted, and the tribe could not return to what had been before. The princess stood firm beside the farmer. She no longer wavered between fear and conviction. Her heart had chosen, and with each passing day, her courage deepened. She saw how the people looked at him, how children lingered near when he worked, how mothers watched with cautious hope. She knew that love alone could not change the West, but she also knew that love, when rooted in endurance, could break even the oldest chains. The farmer himself struggled to understand the path before him. He had never asked to be more than a man who tilled the soil, who survived each day as best he could. Yet he felt the weight of expectation pressing against his shoulders. For the first time, he wondered if his life was meant for something greater. The kiss had awakened more than love. It had awakened destiny. And though he feared it, he could not turn away. One night, as the fire crackled low, the chief himself approached the farmer. His eyes were hard, yet his voice carried the weight of honesty. "A man's worth is not in his bloodline," he said, "but in how he carries it. You have carried yours with silence, with endurance. That is not weakness, it is strength." The farmer bowed his head, humbled, but the chief's words sank deep, planting roots that could not be undone. By dawn, it was clear to all that the farmer was no longer just the subject of whispers. He had become a symbol, not because of riches, not because of power, but because he embodied the truth the West had always known, that love and dignity could defeat even the harshest prejudice. And once a truth like that takes root, no man, no elder, no tradition can silence it. The days turned into weeks, and the camp could no longer ignore what was happening. The poor farmer, once seen as nothing more than a shadow on the edge of their fire, had become a figure people gravitated toward. Children followed him when he walked to the fields, eager to help with his tools. Young warriors, who once mocked him, now studied the steadiness of his silence, as though trying to grasp the source of his unshakable calm. Even the elders, though reluctant, began to measure their words more carefully when he was near, sensing that the people's eyes watched their treatment of him. The princess never doubted what she saw in him. To her, the kiss had not been rebellion, but revelation. She saw in him the kind of strength the West respected most, not the strength of muscle or weapon, but the strength of endurance. He had been broken 100 times by poverty, by rejection, by humiliation, yet he had never lost his dignity. That truth, to her, was more precious than any title or tradition, and she knew that the people were beginning to see it too. Yet, not all accepted the change. A faction within the tribe, stirred by fear and pride, warned that to honor the farmer was to weaken their people. They claimed tradition was slipping away, that the boundaries which defined them were being erased. Their voices grew louder, fueled by resentment and the sting of watching a poor man rise where others had expected him to fall. The tension threatened to fracture the camp. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, the dissenters confronted the princess. Their voices were sharp, demanding that she renounce her choice, that she step away before more damage was done. The princess stood firm, her gaze unyielding. "Love is not weakness," she declared, her words cutting through the rising murmurs. "It is the only strength that can outlast hatred." Her defiance silenced many, but it also deepened the anger of those who clung to pride. The farmer, watching from the shadows, realized the truth. The kiss had not only bound him to her, it had placed him at the heart of a struggle far larger than himself. The tribe was no longer fighting just over tradition. They were fighting over the very definition of honor. And whether he wanted it or not, he had become the proof that dignity and love could stand against centuries of prejudice. That night, the camp gathered in a circle under the stars. The air was heavy, the fire at the center burning like a single eye that saw everything. On one side stood the elders and the warriors who clung to tradition. On the other stood the princess, unflinching, and the farmer, silent but steady. The people waited, knowing that this night would decide whether their story moved forward or whether it ended in bitterness. The chief rose first, his voice deep and deliberate. He reminded them that the West was merciless, that survival depended on unity. A divided people, he said, cannot endure. He turned his gaze toward the farmer, his eyes sharp. And yet, unity cannot be built on weakness. The words cut through the air, and for a moment, it seemed as though the old ways would prevail. But then the oldest elder, her back bent yet her eyes fierce, stood and spoke. Weakness, she echoed. I have seen warriors break under insults softer than what this man has endured. I have seen men with weapons falter when mocked. Yet he has carried silence heavier than any spear. Do not mistake humility for weakness. It is strength few men possess. Her words rippled through the circle, stirring hearts already torn. The princess stepped forward then, taking the farmer's hand. Gasps rose from the crowd, but she did not waver. You call me foolish for choosing him, she said, her voice unwavering. But I say he has already proven himself more than many of you. Love chose him, and love does not bow to fear. The sight of her hand in his, the fearless certainty in her tone, carried more power than any argument. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night sky, and the people fell into silence. They had gathered expecting to bury the matter once and for all, but instead, they found themselves staring at something greater than rebellion, greater than tradition. They were staring at the possibility that love, when fearless, could become the strongest force the West had ever known. The silence that followed the princess's words seemed to stretch across the plains. The crackle of the fire and the distant cry of a night bird were the only sounds that dared to break it. The people shifted uneasily, torn between the weight of tradition and the undeniable force of what stood before them. The farmer, still silent, held her hand firmly, not in defiance, but in quiet acceptance of whatever would come. That silence carried more power than speeches, more conviction than promises. It was the silence of a man who had nothing yet refused to let go of his dignity. Slowly, murmurs rose from the crowd. Some scoffed, their pride still stinging. Yet others spoke softly, almost to themselves, admitting what they had seen with their own eyes. They recalled the farmer enduring insult after insult without striking back, remembered the way he worked tirelessly in the fields, and how he never demanded respect, but carried it within him. Little by little, the whispers shifted the mood, until the circle no longer seemed so firmly against him. A young warrior, bold and restless, suddenly stepped forward. He had once mocked the farmer, calling him weak, but now his eyes burned with something else, recognition. If you call this man unworthy, he said, then what does that make us? For none of us endured what he has without breaking. His words rang out like a challenge, silencing those who clung to prejudice. Even the elders, who guarded tradition with iron hands, found themselves shaken by the truth in his voice. The farmer finally lifted his head. He spoke few words, but each fell heavy as stone. I never asked for this, he said, his voice quiet but steady. I am only a man who works the soil, who endures what he must. But if love sees worth in me, then perhaps it is time we all learn to see it too. His words carried no arrogance, only humility, and that humility struck deeper than pride ever could. By the time the fire burned low, the tide had turned. The people who had once doubted now found themselves moved, not by wealth or power, but by the quiet strength of two hearts that refused to bend. It was clear to all. The farmer and the princess had already defeated prejudice, not with swords, but with the unyielding courage of love. The dawn that followed was unlike any other. The camp stirred not with division, but with a cautious sense of awe. The elders, after long debate, declared that the farmer would not be cast out, nor would the princess be punished. Instead, they would be allowed to walk together, their bond recognized not as rebellion, but as a new path. The decision did not erase all prejudice, but it cracked the stone walls that had bound the people for generations. In the West, such cracks often grew until the whole foundation shifted. The farmer awoke that morning not with riches, not with power, but with something far greater, acceptance. Where once men looked at him with disdain, now their eyes carried something new. Respect, reluctant in some, genuine in others, but respect nonetheless. He had not earned it through battle or boasting, but through quiet endurance and the love that chose him. And in the Old West, that kind of respect outlasted gold, outlasted pride, outlasted even time itself. The princess walked beside him, her head high, unashamed of what she had risked. She knew that challenges still lay ahead, that not all hearts would change overnight. But as she looked at him, at the man who had carried himself with dignity even in the face of scorn, she felt certain of one truth. Love had already proven itself stronger than prejudice. And once proven, such a truth could never be buried again. As weeks turned into months, their story spread beyond the camp. Travelers carried it to distant valleys, whispering of the native princess who kissed the poor farmer and defied centuries of pride. Some called it scandal, others called it foolishness, but many more called it hope. Around campfires and in saloons, men repeated the tale as though it were a legend unfolding before their eyes. The West, brutal and unforgiving, had given birth to countless stories, but few as powerful as this. And so, the farmer and the princess became more than individuals. They became a symbol of what the West rarely allowed, the triumph of the heart over prejudice. Their love, once seen as rebellion, now burned as a beacon of possibility. And long after their names faded, the story remained, carried by the wind across the plains. That one kiss, born of courage, could break the hardest chains and teach even the proudest hearts that love is the greatest force of all. In the end, the story of the poor farmer and the native princess was never truly about a kiss. It was about what that kiss represented. In a world built on pride, where lines of blood and tradition decided a person's worth, their choice shattered the silence of prejudice. He, a man of humble soil, and she, a woman of noble birth, proved that love has the power to reach across divides sharper than any blade. Their courage became a mirror for all who watched, reminding them that dignity cannot be denied to those who endure. What began as whispers of scandal grew into the echo of transformation. The farmer, once invisible, carried himself with the quiet strength of a man who had been seen for the first time. The princess, once bound by expectation, showed her people that true loyalty lies not in obeying old chains, but in daring to choose the truth of the heart. Together, they revealed that the strongest foundations are not built from fear, but from love unafraid to stand in the light of day. Their union taught a lesson the West had long forgotten, that prejudice may be loud, but love speaks deeper. Prejudice isolates, but love unites. Prejudice weakens, but love strengthens. Theirs was a story of endurance, of courage, of two souls willing to walk against the storm together. And long after the fire of that night faded, the memory of their defiance burned brighter than the pride of those who had tried to silence them. So the tale lives on, whispered across the plains, carried by wind and firelight, that by dawn, one kiss proved love could defeat prejudice. It is a reminder not just for the past, but for us now, that courage of the heart is the rarest and most powerful weapon of all. And sometimes, the smallest act, born of truth, can reshape the destiny of many. If this story stirred something in you, let it remind you of the hidden strength in your own choices. Share your reflections in the comments. Your voice adds to the legacy of these timeless tales. And if you want to keep uncovering the forgotten legends of the Old West, subscribe to the channel and leave your mark with a like. Together, we keep alive the stories that teach us what truly endures: dignity, love, and the courage to stand against prejudice.